We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 8th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Xiang.
Good morning, yeah.
And Nao Song.
Hi, everyone.
Both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, we'll start with the news feed for today. Every day, we pick 3 of the top trending hashtags on social media over the past 24 hours to tell you what stories the new gen are talking about. The first hashtag is lithium. Iran says it discovered a massive amount of lithium, which is a key element for making electric vehicle batteries. An official from Iran's Ministry of Industry, Mines and Trade said for the first time in Iran, a lithium reserve was discovered in Hamadan, a mountainous province in the country's west. If this is found to be true, Iran's economy would bounce back up, especially since it has been isolated from Western nations over accusations of Tehran supplying Russia with weapons to use in its war in Ukraine. The second hashtag is Telegram. Police in South Korea have booked a 14-year-old girl with charges of using meth. They found out the teen bought meth through the app Telegram, and the number of teen drug offenders has been on the rise over the past 5 years. According to the National Police Agency, it has jumped by 3-fold from 2018 to 2022. The third hashtag is rookie firefighter. A 30-year-old firefighter died while trying to save a 70-year-old man from a fire on Tuesday night. Both failed to escape in time and died at the scene. The firefighter who died on duty was a rookie. Less than a year had passed since he became a firefighter. Now let's take a closer look at the third hashtag, rookie firefighter. Many went on social media to express their deepest condolences, and most grieved about how young he was. His father talked to reporters and said he died just 10 days before his birthday. There were some other comments that also received a lot of attention as well. If you take a look at the screen, one said, "Though we can't weigh whose life is more valuable, it's a shame to see such a young man die while saving a 70-year-old senior, especially with low birth rates." Another comment that received a lot of likes said the government should protect and prevent the noble deaths of people who've decided to commit their lives to saving other people. Now, I would like to include our panelists here in the studio to hear their thoughts. Niall, what were your thoughts on the first comment?
You know, I completely agree that you cannot weigh lives on who's more valuable and whose life is more valuable, but asking what if questions, all the theoreticals, what if this person had been saved, what if this person went in, is not really helpful for the situation, but all we can do is pay our respects and truly, truly appreciate this act and honor it.
Definitely. And Xian, what about the second comment?
I mean, of course, first of all, my deepest condolences for the hero among us. No one would disagree that life should be wasted as such. And I do agree with the second comment that in a country like Korea, where public institutions such as fire department or police force are paid for by the people, the government should maximize the efficiency of funds so that we could increase the usage of high-tech gears, as well as machine-operated rescue missions that can prevent deaths and unfortunate deaths of the public servants.
Definitely. And President Yoon Suk-yeol also shared his deepest condolences yesterday. He said the government will make sure not to only honor the deceased, but do its best to prevent anything like this from happening again. Now let's move on to our main discussion topic. Today is International Women's Day, a day to commemorate achievements by women around the world. It's also a day to bring attention to issues such as gender equality, so we're going to take a closer look at some of these issues.
You may have come across parking spaces looking like this in Korea. They're women-only parking spaces. Back in 2009, the government painted pink lines on a few parking slots near building entrances and designated them as women-only parking spots. This was to make sure women using parking lots felt safe from crimes such as sexual assault. But ever since their introduction, they've spurred controversy. Critics argued that it was unfair, or that it reinforced the stereotype that women find it harder to park. Recently, Seoul City has decided to get rid of these parking spaces and change them to family parking spots. These would then be available for pregnant women or people traveling with their children. Some critics claim that by doing this, the government is promoting anti-feminism. Women-only parking lots are just the tip of an iceberg when it comes to gender-related issues and conflicts here in Korea. Today, NewsGen looks at 3 questions. 1. How do the younger generation view gender equality in Korea? Do they think gender equality has been achieved? 2. Studies in Korea show the younger people are, the more polarized their views on gender issues get. Why is this the case? 3. How can we achieve better gender equality? Any country Korea can use as a blueprint?
As it's International Women's Day, we've decided to talk about gender issues here in Korea. Hopefully, this can help promote better gender equality and harmony. So, Xiong, start us off by explaining to us what International Women's Day is and how it came about.
Yeah, sure. So International Women's Day is a global holiday celebrated annually on 8th of March and is as a focal point in women's rights movement, bringing attention to issues such as gender equality, reproductive rights, and violence and abuse against women. In 1977, the United Nations General Assembly invited member states to proclaim March 8th as an official UN holiday for women's rights and world peace. Over the years, International Women's Day has become a global event celebrated by millions of people in the countries around the world. It is a time to reflect on the progress made towards gender equality, raise awareness of the challenges that still exist, and inspire action to create a more equal and inclusive world for all.
And as you mentioned, because it's such a global movement, here in Korea, a lot of civic groups and women's rights activists are out on the streets right now celebrating this day. And notwithstanding what this day is trying to promote, Korea has a lot of unsettled gender-related issues that sometimes provoke conflict. It always seems to end up between a fight between men versus women, right?
Unfortunately, it does seem like that, and Korea does seem to have quite severe gendered issues. According to the 2022 Korea Gender Consciousness Survey conducted by Seoul National University Social Development Institute, roughly 67% of all respondents said there is a serious gender conflict in Korean society.
Wow.
Now, what causes this conflict? Let's have a look at the screen. According to the survey, Korean male and females of the younger generation have divided opinions on what causes gender conflict. First, we have the key factors selected by male respondents. First on the list is excessive biased media reports and social media influence at 35.9%. Second would be refusal to accept different opinions. Third being demand for favorable treatment by women. Fourth, preferential policies for women, including job quotas, etc. And lastly, lack of compensation for male mandatory military service. Now let's move on to the next slide, which shows the responses of the female participants. On the other hand, female respondents have the same two opinions at the top, but differs as we go down the list. Obviously, we see it on the third of the list, the issue of sexual harassment and sexual violence by men, making it the third of the list, as well as patriarchal social structure and men thinking they're superior as the biggest reasons for the gender conflict.
I see that on your graph that it mentions the lack of compensation for military service for males, but I also want to point out something that could be a little bit sensitive, but I personally think everyone, no matter what gender you are, should do public service as well as training. And technically speaking, Korea is a nation that could still go to war at any point. So everyone should be able to carry their own weight unless they have some medical reasons that is blocking them from physically doing that. And speaking of, gender equality and conflicts, I want to talk about the word feminism and what kind of negative connotation it brings into Korea. And I think a lot of it is because it came in as such a radical movement and in an extreme way when it came into Korea. And this connects directly with the whole issue of Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. And the word Ministry of Gender Equality and Family in Korea, they actually directly use the word woman in it, which is raising a lot of eyebrows and males who are concerned about the reverse discrimination against males in that area.
I mean, of course, the discussion on reverse discrimination, especially with such ministry, does make sense to a certain extent. But, the reason why feminism is so radical in South Korea is that it's a very new concept. And it does need to be radical to break into the society abruptly and make a real change that, that needs to be made.
Right, though it might be big, it can cause change. And so I think we're saying that it's usually a fight between younger males and females in Korea for many different unsettled gender issues.
That's right.
But why do you think this is the case, Xiao?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think there are two main factors causing such conflict of opinions. First will be that Korea has always been an extremely patriarchal, male-dominated society throughout its history. The recent democratization and dissemination of information, as well as the increase in education, has established an idea of gender equality, but especially in employment and domestic culture, there is still an ongoing sentiment of patriarchy. Funny enough, this doesn't just apply to only men in Korean society, but women of older generations supports this notion as well. Second factor would be the highly competitive society of South Korea. In the era of low economic growth and job insecurity, in the era of low economic growth, job insecurity has become a serious problem in Korea. On top of this, Korean males are are required to serve 2 years, commit 2 years of their life to the military, which hinders their career path and increases the age of entering the job market. So, I mean, this on top of policies that rightfully promote women's labor rights has caused a lot of conflict, especially among the younger generation that wants to get forward quickly as possible.
Yeah. And we were talking about like what makes this fight even more intense, you know. But Korea, as we know, Xiyoung was explaining, it grew in a very immensely short amount of time, and the abrupt economic growth wasn't necessarily matched by the pace with the cultural, philosophical, and ethical changes. And there's still, like he mentioned, a lot of older people who are used to the traditional, more patriarchal ways. And on the other hand, the new generation who, you know, has more access to information, they're quite open to talk about, you know, the clashing opinions.
Definitely.
And we mentioned this earlier about the radical feminism and how it entered Korea. And I think that is what sparks most of the fights.
And I also think it's because of social media. Everyone has so much access to unlimited amount of content. And sometimes it's not filtered enough in the way that can promote healthy feminism.
Yeah, and earlier Xiyoung was mentioning how it does need to be radical to make a change in society. But I want to say that negative emotions it's not the ideal way for change.
Yeah, I mean, but also linking up to social media as well on the online space. It's not just, you know, radical feminism that is the problem. In Korea, we see two very distinct groups of, you know, forums we call in Korea, and they have, you know, some horrible things to say to each other. And as much as it's a lot of hatred, but we got to realize that that doesn't actually voice the opinion of the masses. It's a very small number of people who believe in these radical factors and things like that, and that we should be aware of and not let it become the media, you know, main
become
media
the norm.
influence.
Exactly. All right, and why don't we now include an expert in our talks and see what she has to say on the growing gender conflict, especially among the younger generation here in Korea. Let's also find out if she has a solid solution for us. Let's now include a professor whose main area of expertise includes gender issues and politics. She wrote a lot about issues in Korea, including an article on how gender equality and the feminist movement here have been polarized, especially among the younger generation, leading up to last year's presidential election. It's Dr. Darcy Drott from Princeton University. Great to have you here, Dr. Drott.
Thank you so much, Ye. And I do want to say how much I appreciate your program. I think all of you, your panelists, all have such really good insights to such complex issues. And I think the issue of gender is no exception to that. In fact, I think the gender question is one that's particularly stressful for a lot of people in Korea and around the world because it's just so complicated.
Definitely. Well, that was a really good start to our interview.
I'm impressed.
So, Dr. Drott, I know you did a lot of research in this topic itself. So, how far wide apart do you think the views of South Korean males and females are? And why do you think they have so many unsettled conflicts?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think both Xian and Niall had brought up this, is that we have these really visible, very very radical feminist groups online, or the perception of them being radical on the one hand, and far-right men's groups online. And so the fact that these get a lot of the publicity, I think also highlights that this is some sort of big war, right? And the fact that in Korean you call this a gender war also exacerbates this feeling that there's something really threatening to everybody. You know, today in particular, we're celebrating International Women's Day, but as you all have mentioned, gender issues affect people of all genders. So it's important to consider men's roles in society just as much as we consider women's roles. We need to seriously think about what it means when we talk about somebody's role in the economy or the family or society, and not ignore the diversity of lifestyles that people have in all genders.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, fantastic, Dr. George. And if I could ask you another question as well, how would you assess South Korea's gender equality? Have we come far enough? Which country could be a good measuring stick to follow suit?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I think, as Nael brought up, is the fact that Korea had such a rapid economic and political development. It meant that a lot of the social patterns, the social stigmas, they developed at a different rate, right? And so we have these economic opportunities, these opportunities for education, for travel, that don't necessarily match up with Xian, as you put it, these traditional family roles. And so when we think about how we measure South Korea, I do think that it's really important to think about the wins that a lot of women's groups, civil society organizations have had, particularly since the democratization period. So I'm thinking about in 2005, Korea abolished the family head system, the Hojuje, which is part of this family law, which until then had really been a legal way to have male preference for things like real estate, inheritance, the right to divorce, all of these things, right? So in 2005, that was abolished. That, I think, is a really important landmark. But then I think, as many of your viewers will know, there's also metrics, particularly in workforce participation, that shows a different story. So we have women in South Korea have the lowest wage gap between genders in the world. So it's about if a man makes 1,000 won, a woman makes less than 700 won. So that's a really big difference for the same job. So there's these kinds of ways that I think it's still lagging behind when we talk about gender parity in the workplace.
Definitely.
And lastly, the million-dollar question, Doctor. How would you achieve gender equality? Give us some tips on how we can get there.
If only I had a magic wand.
I know, right?
If only I could, right? This is a big, tough question, but thinking about other countries that have done pretty well in this, the gold standard is Northern European countries, the Nordic countries. Looking at countries like Sweden, actually, I think is a really good example for South Korea, especially given the policies that Korea has in place. In January, the Ministry of Employment and Labor set forth a plan to have 18 months of parental leave, which is the longest in the world, right? So this is remarkable. The only other countries in the world that do this are countries like Northern Europe, right? So these are the kinds of policies that I think we can learn from. It's just a matter of, can we have the social practices catch up to them?
For sure.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Jod. It was a pleasure to have you here and hear your insights.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you all. It was my pleasure.
Now, if I bring the discussion back to the studio, Xiao, which point fascinated you the most?
I mean, obviously a lot of the things Dr. George mentioned were very constructive and good points to take on. But I think a few things in suggesting that, while Korea does have quite, decent policies that keep getting made and newer ones coming up for discussion in the parliament as well, we do see, I think it's more of a sort of a social concept.
Definitely.
I think that's the problem we see here in South Korea. And I mean, as Dr. George mentioned as well, these sort of online forums creating the conflict and exacerbating, putting the oil to the fire is part of the big problem. And I think the media actually does take on board a lot of what they say. and try to sometimes even politicize it and use it to certain groups' advantages and things like that.
Specific words are used that might exacerbate these conflicts. All right, and why don't we now include our viewers into our discussion? And we asked whether they feel like their society has achieved a fair amount of gender equality. So if you take a look at the screen, we asked what they think about this, and KB said, I love seeing women in higher roles in the Korean media. It's a great example that we need more of. Raul279 said, difficult to say if it's a fair amount, but I think the advances are huge. Women are CEOs, news broadcasters, business owners, and in my opinion, they can do anything. MP83 said, still a lot of work needed in Korea. How many women politicians are there? Now, these are all fascinating points, but Nell, which caught your attention the most?
I mean, I think the first one is talking about the Korean media and how we see people taking on more leadership roles, and it might not be as practical and visible as political changes, but I do think that media plays such an important role in changing people's mindsets. So I completely agree with you.
Right, Anshio?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I think KB and Raul are both talking about, I think, basically an Arirang studio as well.
Look at us.
Yes.
Majority of women anchors and announcers as well as panelists as well, which is great to see in the South Korean media industry as well. But commenting on Impe83's comment, there is a lot of work that needs to be done in Korea across all sectors. For example, to answer his or her question, the current incumbency of the 21st National Assembly, which is the current set of National Assembly, is made up of only 19% of female members of the parliament.
Wow.
Right, and this is far below the world average of 25.6%. And Korea ranks at mere 121st place out of 190 countries.
Yeah, so we definitely need a lot more work.
Still a long way to go.
All right, every day we do upload questions related to our discussion topic for our viewers to answer. If you want to participate, please search ArirangNews on YouTube. Look into our community tab. The link is right below. Now we've come to the final part of our discussion. Niall, what do you think we should do to reduce any gender conflicts?
You know, as it is International Women's Day, I want to state this about feminism. And it isn't to, tear anyone down, but it's actually to lift all of us up together, meaning that we shouldn't stir up hatred and, for the other gender, discourage other women from being traditional, conservative, or even liberal or modern. It should be about freedom of choice and respecting each other.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think values are important. I think in Korea you can see that as well. We see a lot of liberal women as well, a lot of liberal men. It doesn't matter which gender you are, basically. But at the same time, we see a lot of conservative people as well. And it's funny to see because it's not always the men who are conservative. We often see even young women being very conservative, being proud of being Yu-Gi-Oh girl and Yu-Gi-Oh boy and things like that. Which is understandable and which is their own set of values and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good time to mention a quote by the actress Emma Watson. It's one of my favorite quotes actually on gender issues especially. She says, it is time that we all see gender as a spectrum instead of two sets of opposing ideals.
That's a really good quote. And I think that's a good note where we can end off today. As we're celebrating International Women's Day, we hope today's episode of News Generation could pave the way for better inclusion and equality of all genders here in Korea and other parts of the world. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you the topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiao.
My pleasure, yeah.
And Niall Song.
Happy to be here.
And thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.